Hi, my name is Lauren Burrows. This is Jayla Stump, and today we're going to be talking about predictive policing. It's also called PredPol. There's a system named that, so we're going to be talking about that today.
So what is PredPol? So essentially PredPol is going to be like a scientific artificial intelligence program that has been developed to predict crime. From the PredPol website, their definition of their system is a research field whose principal aims to develop machines for predicting crimes, drawing on machine learning algorithms, and the growing availability of diversity of data. So in kind of simple forms, how I would put it, it is a system that uses data collection to prevent future crimes. So how it is used. So it can kind of be seen across a large group of things. It's kind of a growing field right now. But what it kind of focuses on is location. So a lot of data is collected based on specific locations, specific times, communities, things like that. So hotspots and crime mapping are going to be the biggest kind of driving factors behind PredPol. What they do is once that data is collected, such as repetitive crimes in certain locations, then a lot of times police departments will increase surveillance or coverage of that area just because they know that it's going to be a hotspot for repetitive crimes. A few others are going to be data mining, which is going to be once the data is analyzed, it is used for informative purposes. Social networking, so that just goes off of social structures such as social class and stuff like that. And then data collection, again, is kind of what predictive policing totally is. So a good example of what data collection is, one of our articles talked about that Walmart has collected data that once a storm is coming in, whether that's snow or heavy rain or something like that, there are 3 most bought items during that time, and those are going to be duct tape, water bottles, and strawberry Pop-Tarts, which we found to be kind of comical. But for the company of Walmart, they use that data collection to see these are the top 3 items that we need the most during this time, and so they make sure that their stores and their locations are going to have those top 3 items because that's what the data is showing, and they want to serve their customers right. So that's kind of a more
funny way of putting
it. A funny way of putting it. Okay, so now let's talk about a few examples of really how this PredPol system has been used in law enforcement, in our real society today. So the first one is going to be random gunfire during New Year's Eve. So I believe this was in Virginia. They did a study on their New Year's Eve parades and events and stuff like that because they were seeing an increase of gunfire on that specific day. So what they did is they kind of gathered data based on the time that these events are happening, the location, and then the nature, whether that's going to be an open gunfire or inside or outside, or if a person is sitting up in a building or things like that. So just what nature it's being done at. So that's going to go back into kind of what we talked about with the hotspots, the crime mapping, and then the social structure as well. So what they found, or once they collected all this data, what they did was they stationed officers in those specific locations at those specific times that they were seeing to kind of prevent or decrease the numbers of gunfire. And after this was completed and everything, and once they stationed those officers, they found that there was a 47% decrease in random gunfire. So this is a really good example of time, location, and nature all going together with the PredPol system to prevent that decrease in gunfire. Another example had taken place in Arlington, Texas, and what they did with the PredPol system was look at burglaries in residential areas. So they were seeing just a consistency of certain residences and communities being hotspots for crime and burglaries. So what they did was, again, collected the data and kind of looked at it to see what they were looking at. And what they found was that the resident areas that had greater physical code violations, which are going to be physical decay or improper structures or water systems and stuff like that, showed that they are more at risk for burglaries because they are kind of easier to get into. So what they did with that information, again, was increase the policing in that specific area or the areas that showed greater physical decay. And with that, they kind of decreased those numbers of burglaries in that area based on the PredPol system and the data collection that they found. So that's kind of how it's used and how it can be seen like in society with our law enforcement today. So there are three major crime pattern formations that PredPol kind of bases its data analysis off of. And this is going to be repeat victimization, near repeat victimization, and local search. So repeat victimization kind of speaks for itself. It's just going to be criminal offenders returning to the same locations. Again, going back into the hot spots and the crime mapping. Near repeat is going to be like nearby locations. This is often seen in like neighborhood houses. If one house is in the neighborhood is targeted and has a crime committed at it, it is very common that surrounding houses in that neighborhood are also going to be, just because they're nearby and the criminals know like that's the area that they're looking at. And local search is also another one, because when committing crimes, people don't typically travel far, because that kind of makes their job more difficult. So they kind of cluster in the local areas, and again, it just kind of makes that data stronger for those local areas. And then just for kind of like fun insight, here's the mathematical equation for the algorithm that PredPol uses. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you how to solve that or what that all really means, but I just wanted to add that in there just kind of for a different perspective.
So with predictive policing, there are, of course, ethical concerns. So the main ones that we are going to talk about today are the stigmatization of individuals, environments, and communities, machine program bias, accountability, and fundamental rights. So with predictive policing, there is the potential issue for stigma to be surrounded around certain individuals. This could be racial bias, community bias, environments and communities. So it's basically, what if the system targets a specific community based off of not actual criminal behavior, but based off of the color of someone's skin or the area. An example of this would be, it is more likely that police would detect and target South Wichita for criminal behavior rather than they would in, say, like East Borough, just because of, I don't know, bias, things like that. So then going on with bias, machine program bias. So the system is electronic, it's artificial intelligence. The problem with that is that the programs might be trained on outdated data. The data collection might not have as big of a range or a variety of people that they collected data from originally. So they could have collected data from a small area in Wichita rather than all of Wichita, or instances like that. So that could be a problem. So that could also mean inaccuracy as well, people moving out of that area, people moving to that area, etc. So then we have to look at accountability. So who's actually accountable for the system? Is the artificial intelligence at fault when it is inaccurate or there's errors, or is it the people who program the machines that are accountable for it? So then again, threatening to fundamental rights. A big problem is the racial bias, because if an operator of the machine is inputting data and they have racial bias one way or the other, that could affect how the system works, and so that could be an ethical concern for predictive policing services. So then, looking at the alignment problem, our text for the class, one of the main quotes that we took, I believe it was from chapter 2, about predictive policing is, many will be frankly skeptical of the feasibility of introducing scientific methods into any field of human behavior. They'll dismiss the proposal with the assertion that human nature is too variable for making any prediction about it. Which I think that quote is very interesting, just because, ironically, humans are unpredictable. Their behaviors are unpredictable. Someone who committed a crime today might not commit that same crime tomorrow. So just the unpredictability of human behavior the alignment problem is discussing where artificial intelligence should cut into that. So then it further goes into talking about the alignment problem predicting future policing, not future crime. So it's looking at the way police use data to predict future events happening by location and time, not necessarily the actual crime. So then they are looking at this data and its patterns, like Jayla said. Those patterns are looked at and biases are looked at as well. So that is what the alignment problem discusses. So one of our articles talked about possible solutions and alternatives. So one of our resources said PredPol is focused on predicting crime and collecting data, not how police should respond to crime, which I think is really important because we can gather all of this data and that doesn't say anything about what the judicial system, what the government, what the law enforcement is going to actually do and how they're going to respond to the crime. So they can do whatever with that data that they will. So that is really important. And we, earlier in this class, watched Minority Reports. And within that film, it was talking about convicting people prior to the crime being committed, which is not what predictive policing in our real world is about. It is not about arresting criminals before they commit crimes. It is about knowing the time and location and targeting areas for crime, not the individual person. So another alternative is collecting data for crime prevention with social policies and providing social resources. It talked about in one of our articles, One Summer Program, that's what it was called in Chicago. Basically, they just provided social resources for youth, and they were like, here are these resources for you, and it lessened crime rates by 51%. So simple factors, just as providing resources to those who may commit crimes in the future or might be have a tendency, or their background, or just all that data. Crime can be reduced with just providing simple resources.
Okay, and so just as in like kind of anything that's going to be new and upcoming, there's going to be questions to consider. You have to look at the ethical concerns, you have to look at the social concerns, legal concerns, and also the benefits too, as well, and kind of look at those pros and cons and really see and think through it and just kind of like get that discussion going of, is this beneficial or is this not? So a few questions that we came up with that would be like important to consider and just kind of ponder, or questions that we had while kind of researching this was, the first one being, is PredPol significantly beneficial system to reduce crime and criminal behavior? And personally, I think that it is a beneficial system. We can look at the examples of the gunfire on New Year's Eve, or we can look at the Arlington, Texas example about burglaries in residential areas. So I think that the benefits of this are pretty strong. I think we're seeing data and specific examples that are showing that based on the PredPol data collection, we are able to implement stronger systems to kind of reduce those crimes in specific areas, locations, communities, things like that. And then I think Lauren's going to share on the next one.
Yes. Are the alternatives effective enough to outweigh concerns? So we talked about our ethical concerns, racial bias, stigmatization, all those different things. And then we talked about alternatives. And the biggest factor was providing social resources. I think that is an effective tool to use. It reduced crime by 51%, like I said previously, in Chicago, just by providing social resources. So I think that anything is better than nothing, and social resources being provided can lessen crime rates, so that is important. And our last question is, predictive policing ethical? I personally believe that it is ethical. I think that there's some fine-tuning and tweaking to do, and there's always advancements with new artificial intelligence and technology. So I think that with that fine-tuning, that it could be a helpful resource to reduce crime in the future.
Yes, and just building on what like Lauren just kind of said, as of now, I think there's still ethical concerns and ethical problems with predictive policing and PredPol that can later be kind of, like she said, fine-tuned and more advanced to kind of eliminate those ethical concerns and create a more sound system, getting rid of those biases and things like that. So right now, I don't think it's as strongly ethical, but I think eventually it could definitely be an ethical system that is beneficial to society.
Exactly. These are our resources. So they have some good, helpful information about PredPol. The PredPol website is on there as well. So yeah, thank you for listening to our presentation.